My name is Haley Morrison, and I'm 26 years old. Right now, I'm standing inside the luxurious lobby of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Chicago, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as my parents and sister pound desperately on the glass doors. Security guards stand firmly between them and entry, while my family screams and gestures frantically at me. In my hand, I hold their room keycards and the confirmation numbers for every reservation they need. But let me tell you how we got here, because this moment didn't happen overnight. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a tale of family drama and ultimate justice. Make sure to subscribe because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when a lifetime of being the family scapegoat finally reaches its breaking point. Growing up in suburban Milwaukee, I learned early that families aren't always the safe havens they're supposed to be. My older sister Brooke, who's 29 now, was what people call the golden child. Everything she did was perfect in my parents' eyes, while everything I did was somehow wrong or not good enough. My mother Linda, who's 52, has always been Brooke's biggest enabler, making excuses for behavior that would get any other child in serious trouble. My father Robert, 54 and a financial advisor who should know better about investments, has consistently treated me like his worst performing stock while viewing Brooke as his blue-chip winner. The pattern started when we were children and never stopped. When I was 8 years old, Brooke deliberately pushed me down a flight of stairs during one of her tantrums. I ended up with a broken arm and had to wear a cast for 6 weeks. Instead of punishing Brooke or even acknowledging what she'd done, my parents laughed it off and told everyone I was just clumsy. They said sisters play rough sometimes and that I needed to be more careful. Even as a child, I knew something was wrong with that response, but I didn't have the words to express how it made me feel. This dynamic continued throughout our school years. I worked incredibly hard to maintain a 4.0 GPA, participated in debate team and student council, and volunteered at the local animal shelter every weekend. Meanwhile, Brooke barely scraped by with C's and D's, spent most of her time partying with friends, and showed zero interest in any extracurricular activities. Yet when report cards came out, my parents would praise Brooke for just passing while criticizing me for not being involved in enough activities, or for choosing the wrong subjects. The financial disparity was perhaps the most painful part. When it came time for college, my parents didn't hesitate to pay full tuition for Brooke's expensive private university, even though she'd shown no academic promise. They bought her a brand new car, filled her dorm room with designer furniture, and sent her generous monthly allowances for spending money. When my turn came, despite my academic achievements and acceptance into several prestigious schools, they told me money was tight, and I'd need to figure it out myself. I worked 3 jobs throughout college, took out massive student loans, and lived in the cheapest housing I could find while maintaining my grades and building the foundation for my future career. After graduation, I started my own event planning company called Elegant Affairs. Through sheer determination and countless 18-hour days, I built it into one of the most sought-after luxury event companies in the Midwest. My clients include Fortune 500 executives, celebrities, and high-profile families who trust me with their most important celebrations. Every success I achieved was hard-earned and accomplished without any help from my family, who continued to treat my accomplishments as lucky accidents while celebrating Brooke's mediocrity as genius. Now at 26, I've learned to maintain careful distance from my family's toxicity. I see them during major holidays and family obligations, always steeling myself for the inevitable comments about how I should be more like Brooke or questions about why I can't just be happy for my sister's achievements. The irony is that Brooke's biggest achievement recently was getting divorced from a marriage that lasted less than 2 years and moving back into our parents' house because she can't support herself. Yet somehow, in my family's twisted logic, this makes her more relatable and worthy of sympathy than my business success makes me worthy of respect. The phone call that changed everything came 3 weeks ago. My mother's voice was unusually sweet when she asked if I'd be willing to help plan our grandmother Eleanor's 80th birthday celebration in Chicago. She used words like family unity and special occasions, and how much it would mean to grandmother. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe things could be different, that perhaps my family was finally ready to treat me as an equal member rather than the designated problem child. When my mother Linda called that Tuesday evening, her tone immediately put me on alert. She was being uncharacteristically sweet and accommodating, using the kind of voice people reserve for sales calls, or when they need massive favors. She explained that grandmother Eleanor was turning 80 and deserved a celebration worthy of the milestone. Linda went on about how grandmother had always been special to both Brooke and me, and how wonderful it would be to create magical memories together as a family. The red flags started appearing almost immediately. First, my parents were suddenly being nice to me, which historically only happened when they needed something expensive or difficult accomplished. Second, they kept mentioning how they wanted to help financially with the celebration, which was laughable given their track record of promising support, and then backing out once I'd already committed resources. Third, every other sentence included some version of how family should help family, and how this was our chance to really come together. As Linda continued talking, I could hear Brooke in the background making comments and suggestions, clearly orchestrating parts of the conversation. My mother kept referring to notes and saying things like, "Oh, and Brooke thought it would be nice if we could get a really elegant hotel, maybe something downtown Chicago where grandmother could feel pampered." The more she talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't a spontaneous family gesture, but a carefully planned manipulation with me as the target. The conversation took an interesting turn when Linda started gushing about my business success and how impressed everyone was with my work. She mentioned specific events I'd planned that had been featured in local magazines and talked about how talented I was with vendors and luxury venues. Initially, I felt a warm glow of recognition, thinking maybe my parents were finally acknowledging my achievements. However, as she continued, I realized she was building up to something much more calculated. Then came the real request. Linda wanted me to use my industry connections and expertise to plan the perfect weekend celebration at a 5-star hotel in Chicago. She painted a picture of an elegant gathering with our extended family, complete with professional photography, gourmet dining experiences, and luxury accommodations. She estimated they'd need rooms for about 15 family members, and wanted the celebration to span an entire weekend with multiple events and activities. When I started asking practical questions about budget and timeline, Linda's responses became vague and evasive. She kept saying things like, "Oh, we'll figure out the money part, and I'm sure we can work something out," while emphasizing how much this would mean to grandmother, and how I was the only one with the skills and connections to make it happen properly. She also mentioned that Brooke was going through a difficult time with her recent divorce and unemployment, and how nice it would be if she could be involved in the planning process to give her something positive to focus on. The manipulation became crystal clear when Linda suggested that having Brooke help with the planning would be wonderful for her self-esteem, and that I shouldn't worry about taking credit for everything because family celebrations are about bringing people together, not individual recognition. She painted this picture of sisterly collaboration and family harmony that bore no resemblance to our actual relationship dynamics. The conversation ended with Linda expressing confidence that I'd do the right thing for the family, and promising that everyone would contribute appropriately to make sure I wasn't shouldering the financial burden alone. Against every instinct I'd developed over the years, I found myself agreeing to help. Perhaps it was the genuine affection I felt for my grandmother Eleanor, or maybe it was the tiny hope that my family might finally be ready to change their patterns. Whatever the reason, I told Linda I'd look into options for a luxury hotel celebration and get back to her with ideas and pricing. I spent that entire night researching venues, calling contacts, and putting together preliminary plans for what could be an absolutely beautiful 80th birthday celebration. The next morning, I called the Ritz-Carlton Chicago and spoke with their events coordinator about availability for our desired weekend. Using my industry reputation and relationships, I was able to secure their penthouse suite along with several adjoining luxury rooms, private dining rooms, spa packages, and concierge services that would normally require months of advance booking. The total package I arranged included everything from welcome champagne service to professional photography, private chef experiences, and luxury transportation around the city. When I called Linda back with the details, her enthusiasm was overwhelming. She kept saying how perfect everything sounded, and how impressed grandmother would be with such an elegant celebration. However, when I mentioned the total cost would be approximately $15,000 for the entire weekend with all the luxury amenities and services, there was a long pause in the conversation. Linda's response was that it sounded absolutely perfect, and she was sure we could work out the payment details as we got closer to the date. That response should have been my final warning, but I was already committed to making this celebration special for grandmother Eleanor. I put down my credit card to hold all the reservations, telling myself that my parents would reimburse me as promised, and that this was an investment in family relationships that might finally pay emotional dividends. Looking back now, I can see that I was setting myself up for exactly the kind of exploitation and manipulation that had defined my relationship with my family since childhood. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into planning grandmother Eleanor's celebration with the same dedication and attention to detail that had made my business successful. I coordinated with the Ritz-Carlton's event staff to customize every aspect of the weekend, from selecting menu options that would accommodate various dietary restrictions, to arranging for a professional photographer who specialized in multi-generational family portraits. I scheduled private spa treatments, arranged for luxury transportation to take the family to grandmother's favorite museum, and even hired a pianist to perform her favorite songs during the birthday dinner. The costs continued to climb as I added thoughtful touches that would make the celebration truly memorable. I arranged for fresh flowers to be delivered to all the guest rooms daily, coordinated with a local bakery to create a custom cake featuring hand-piped decorations that matched grandmother's favorite garden roses, and even hired a calligrapher to create beautiful place cards and menu cards for the formal dinner. Every detail was designed to show grandmother how much she was loved and valued by her family. As the total approached $15,000, I called my parents to discuss the financial arrangements we'd need to make. The conversation with my father Robert was particularly frustrating, because he kept deflecting direct questions about payment, while praising how wonderful everything sounded. When I pressed for specifics about how we'd handle the costs, he became vague and started talking about how family events were investments in relationships rather than financial transactions. He suggested we could work out reimbursement schedules after the celebration, when everyone could see how beautiful everything turned out. The first major red flag came when I started receiving phone calls from the vendors I'd hired. Apparently, Brooke had been contacting them directly, introducing herself as the primary event coordinator and giving instructions that contradicted arrangements I'd already finalized. She called the photographer to change the shooting schedule, contacted the restaurant to modify menu selections, and even tried to upgrade certain services without any understanding of how it would affect the carefully balanced logistics I'd created. When I confronted my mother about Brooke's interference, Linda's response was that Brooke was just excited to help and wanted to feel involved in creating something special for grandmother. She suggested that having 2 people working on the celebration would make everything even better, and that I shouldn't worry so much about having complete control over every detail. The irony was that Brooke's changes weren't improvements, but random alterations that demonstrated her complete lack of understanding about event planning logistics. The situation escalated when several vendors began calling me to clarify which instructions they should follow. The photographer was particularly concerned, because Brooke had requested changes to the timeline that would eliminate key family groupings I'd specifically planned to ensure grandmother would have photos with everyone. The restaurant manager was confused because Brooke's menu modifications removed items I'd selected specifically for grandmother's dietary needs and preferences. I spent an entire day calling every vendor to clarify that all changes needed to be approved through me as the primary contact, and that any future communications from Brooke should be directed to me first. This damage control was not only time-consuming, but also embarrassing from a professional standpoint, as these were vendors I'd worked with before who knew me as organized and decisive. Having to explain family dynamics and communication issues was incredibly awkward and potentially damaging to my business reputation. The situation worsened when I discovered that Brooke had been telling extended family members that she was planning grandmother's celebration, and that I was just helping with some of the details. Aunt Joyce called to thank Brooke for organizing such a beautiful celebration, and mentioned how nice it was that Brooke had finally found something she was passionate about. When I tried to clarify my role in the planning process, Aunt Joyce seemed surprised and said Brooke had been posting on social media about all her planning activities and vendor meetings. My parents' response to this credit stealing was to tell me I was being petty about recognition, and that what mattered was grandmother having a beautiful celebration, not who got credit for organizing it. They suggested that Brooke needed positive attention after her difficult divorce, and that being generous with recognition was part of being a good sister. The gaslighting was so familiar, and yet so infuriating that I found myself questioning whether I was actually being unreasonable about wanting acknowledgement for work I was doing and paying for. The breaking point in this planning phase came when the hotel's event coordinator called to express concern about conflicting information she'd been receiving. Brooke had contacted the hotel directly, claiming to be the primary planner, and had attempted to make significant changes to our room arrangements and event scheduling. The coordinator was confused because the credit card on file and primary contact information were mine, but this other person was claiming authority over all decisions. I realized that I was being systematically set up to fail while simultaneously being financially exploited. My family had positioned me to handle all the complex logistics and absorb all the costs while ensuring that Brooke would receive all the credit and praise for the successful event. If anything went wrong due to the confusion and conflicting instructions, I would be blamed for poor planning. But if everything went perfectly, Brooke would be celebrated as the thoughtful daughter who created a magical celebration for grandmother. The financial pressure was also mounting as vendors required deposits and confirmations. My credit card was approaching its limit, and my parents continued to be vague about reimbursement timelines whenever I brought up the mounting costs. Robert kept saying that family celebrations were priceless, and that we'd work out the money details after everyone could see how wonderful the weekend turned out. The implication was clear that my investment in this celebration was expected rather than appreciated, and that requesting reimbursement was somehow mercenary rather than reasonable. Despite all these warning signs, I continued with the planning because backing out at that point would have meant disappointing grandmother Eleanor, who was genuinely excited about the celebration. I told myself that maybe this time would be different, that maybe my family would finally acknowledge my contributions and treat me with the respect I deserved. I was setting myself up for exactly the kind of humiliation and exploitation that had characterized my family relationships since childhood, but I couldn't see a way to protect myself without hurting the one family member who had always shown me genuine love and respect. The Friday morning of grandmother's celebration weekend, I arrived at the Ritz-Carlton 3 hours before the official check-in time to coordinate final details with the hotel staff and ensure every element was perfectly positioned for my family's arrival. I walked through each guest room to verify that the welcome flowers had been delivered correctly, checked that the champagne service was properly chilled and ready, and confirmed timing with the photographer who would capture our family's entrance to the hotel. The transformation of the penthouse suite into a celebration space was absolutely breathtaking. I'd worked with the hotel's design team to create elegant floral arrangements that complemented the room's luxury furnishings, and we'd arranged for professional lighting that would make every photo opportunity magical. The custom birthday cake was positioned perfectly on the dining table, surrounded by handwritten place cards that would guide family members to their seats for our formal dinner that evening. When my parents and Brooke arrived at the hotel just after noon, I was waiting in the lobby to personally welcome them and guide them through the check-in process. My mother Linda immediately began gushing about how beautiful everything looked, commenting on the elegant flower arrangements in the lobby and the professional way the hotel staff was treating our family. For just a moment, I felt the warm glow of appreciation that I'd been craving for so many years. However, that moment of warmth evaporated quickly when Brooke began loudly taking credit for the decorations and arrangements in front of the hotel staff. She started pointing at floral displays and telling the concierge how she'd specifically chosen those colors and styles because they would complement grandmother's favorite dress. She described detailed planning conversations with vendors that had never happened and took credit for thoughtful touches that had required weeks of coordination on my part. What made this particularly humiliating was that several hotel staff members who had worked directly with me on planning these details were standing right there listening to Brooke's fabricated stories. The event coordinator, who had spent hours on the phone with me working through logistics, looked confused and uncomfortable as Brooke claimed responsibility for decisions we had made together. I tried to gracefully redirect the conversation, but my parents immediately supported Brooke's version of events and began praising her creativity and organizational skills. The afternoon continued with a scheduled professional photography session in the hotel's most elegant spaces. I'd specifically arranged for this session to capture beautiful multi-generational family photos that grandmother could treasure, and I'd coordinated the timing to take advantage of perfect lighting conditions. The photographer, Janet Mills, was someone I'd worked with on multiple high-profile events, and I was confident she would create stunning images that would become family heirlooms. As we were positioning ourselves for the first family grouping photo, with grandmother Eleanor in the center surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Brooke suddenly decided she wanted a different arrangement. Without any warning or discussion, she put both hands on my shoulders and gave me a violent shove that sent me backward into one of the lobby's marble columns. The impact was hard enough that I hit my head against the stone and felt immediate sharp pain along with disorientation. The sound of my body hitting the marble column echoed through the elegant lobby, and several hotel guests turned to stare at our family in shock. I felt warm blood beginning to trickle down from a cut on my scalp where I'd struck the marble, and my vision was slightly blurred from the impact. Hotel staff immediately approached to offer assistance, clearly concerned about the violent incident they'd just witnessed in their upscale establishment. Instead of showing concern for my injury or apologizing for Brooke's aggressive behavior, my parents burst into laughter. They found the entire situation hilarious, with my father Robert commenting that Brooke was so playful, and my mother Linda saying that sisters always roughhouse like that. They acted as if witnessing their daughter being violently assaulted by their other daughter was the funniest thing they'd seen all day. The hotel manager, Carlos Rodriguez, approached our group with obvious concern and asked if I needed medical attention, or if there was anything the hotel could do to help. He had clearly witnessed the entire incident and was treating it as the serious assault it actually was. His professional demeanor and genuine concern for my well-being stood in stark contrast to my family's dismissive laughter and casual attitude toward what had just happened. When I tried to explain to my parents that Brooke had actually hurt me and that my head was bleeding from the impact, they immediately turned the situation around to blame me. My father suggested that I had been standing in the wrong place and should have been more aware of my surroundings. My mother added that I was being overly dramatic about what she called a little sisterly bump, and that I needed to stop trying to make everything about me during grandmother's special weekend. The hotel security team had also witnessed the incident and approached to ask if they needed to intervene or document what had occurred. Their body language and professional concern made it clear that they understood they had just observed an assault, and they were prepared to take appropriate action if I wanted to pursue it. However, with my family pressuring me to downplay the incident and not cause drama during grandmother's celebration, I found myself making excuses and minimizing what had happened. As we continued with the photography session, I tried to hide the cut on my head and pretend that everything was fine, but the photographer Janet Mills kept expressing concern about my injury and asking if I needed to take a break. She had clearly seen the entire incident and was disturbed by both Brooke's violence and my family's reaction to it. Several times during the session, she quietly asked if I was okay and if there was anything she could do to help. The remainder of that first day was a constant emotional assault as my family continued to treat me like the problem while celebrating Brooke's every action. During our welcome dinner, Brooke held court telling stories about her planning process and accepting praise from extended family members for creating such a beautiful celebration. Every detail that I had actually planned and paid for was attributed to Brooke's creativity and thoughtfulness, while I sat there with a bandage on my head trying to smile and pretend everything was wonderful. By the time we returned to our rooms that evening, I realized that this weekend wasn't going to be the family bonding experience I had hoped for. Instead, it was shaping up to be the most expensive and elaborate humiliation I had ever endured. I lay in bed that night with my head throbbing from both the physical injury and the emotional abuse, finally understanding that my family's treatment of me was never going to change no matter how much effort I put into trying to earn their respect and love. Saturday morning brought the arrival of grandmother Eleanor, and I felt a surge of genuine excitement to see the one family member who had always treated me with love and respect. At 80 years old, grandmother remained sharp, elegant, and observant, with an innate ability to see through pretense and manipulation that had served her well throughout her long life. As I helped her settle into her luxury suite, I hoped her presence might bring out better behavior from the rest of our family. However, it quickly became apparent that grandmother had been watching our family dynamics much more closely than anyone realized. During a private moment while I was helping her unpack her belongings, she pulled me aside and looked directly at the bandage covering the cut on my head from yesterday's incident. Her expression was a mixture of concern and disappointment that immediately told me she knew exactly what had happened and how my family had responded to it. Eleanor asked me directly about the injury and whether Brooke had caused it, demonstrating that despite my family's attempts to downplay the assault, she understood the seriousness of what had occurred. When I tried to minimize the incident and protect my family's reputation, grandmother stopped me with a gentle but firm hand on my arm and said she was too old for polite lies and too wise to be fooled by manipulation. What grandmother told me next completely changed my understanding of the family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. She revealed that she had been observing how differently my parents treated Brooke and me for years, and that she was disgusted by their favoritism and emotional abuse. She had watched me work incredibly hard to build a successful business while receiving no support from my family, while simultaneously watching them celebrate Brooke's failures and mediocrity, as if they were achievements. The most shocking revelation came when grandmother told me about her will and inheritance plans. She explained that she had originally intended to leave her estate equally divided between Brooke and me, believing that fairness required equal treatment of both granddaughters. However, she had recently discovered that my parents were actively coaching Brooke on how to manipulate her into changing the will to leave everything to Brooke exclusively. Eleanor described overhearing phone conversations where my parents discussed strategies for convincing her that Brooke needed more financial support because of her divorce and unemployment, while suggesting that I was already successful enough that I didn't need inheritance money. They had planned to use this weekend celebration as an opportunity to showcase Brooke's supposed thoughtfulness and planning abilities while positioning me as someone who didn't really care about family relationships. Grandmother's voice carried a mixture of sadness and anger, as she described realizing that my parents viewed her primarily as a source of money to be manipulated rather than as a family member to be honored and loved. She had initially assumed that organizing this elaborate celebration demonstrated genuine family affection, but she was beginning to understand that it was actually an expensive performance designed to influence her financial decisions. The conversation was interrupted when my mother Linda knocked on the door to remind us about our scheduled spa appointments and lunch reservations. As we rejoined the family group, I tried to process everything grandmother had just revealed while maintaining the facade of family harmony that everyone expected. However, I found it increasingly difficult to smile and participate in conversations when I now understood the true motivations behind this entire weekend. During our spa treatments and lunch, I watched my family's behavior with new awareness of their manipulation tactics. My parents consistently directed praise and attention toward Brooke while ignoring or minimizing my contributions to the weekend's success. They made sure grandmother noticed every small thing Brooke did while somehow failing to acknowledge that I had planned, coordinated, and paid for everything we were experiencing. The evening's birthday dinner was held in the hotel's most exclusive private dining room, beautifully decorated with the flowers and candles I had specifically selected to create an elegant atmosphere worthy of grandmother's milestone birthday. The custom cake I had commissioned sat as the centerpiece of the celebration, surrounded by place cards written in calligraphy and menu cards that detailed the gourmet meal I had arranged with the hotel's executive chef. When it came time for speeches and toasts, Brooke stood up and delivered a lengthy presentation taking full credit for planning and organizing the entire weekend celebration. She described in detail all the vendors she had supposedly coordinated with, all the decisions she had supposedly made, and all the thoughtful touches she had supposedly arranged to make this weekend special for grandmother. My parents beamed with pride as she spoke, nodding and smiling as if every word was true. The most painful moment came when my father Robert stood up after Brooke's speech and made his own toast to the daughter who really matters, and the one who knows how to put family first. He praised Brooke's creativity, organization skills, and family devotion while pointedly avoiding any mention of my involvement in creating the celebration. His words made it crystal clear that in his mind, I was not the daughter who mattered, and that my contributions to family relationships were neither valued nor appreciated. As the evening concluded with extended family members thanking Brooke for organizing such a beautiful celebration and praising her thoughtfulness, I realized that this humiliation was the culmination of 30 years of systematic emotional abuse and exploitation. I had been set up to pay for and plan my own public humiliation while providing my family with another opportunity to demonstrate that I would always be the scapegoat while Brooke would always be the golden child. Sitting there surrounded by the elegant celebration I had created, listening to my sister receive praise for work I had done and money I had spent, I finally understood that this pattern would never change. No matter how successful I became, how hard I worked, or how much I sacrificed for my family, they would always find ways to diminish my worth while elevating Brooke's value. The realization was devastating but also strangely liberating, because it finally gave me permission to stop trying to earn love and respect from people who were constitutionally incapable of providing either. As the dinner concluded and family members began returning to their rooms, I excused myself from the group, claiming I needed some fresh air to clear my head. What I actually needed was space to process everything that had happened, and to decide how I was going to respond to this ultimate betrayal. Standing alone on the hotel's outdoor terrace, looking out at the Chicago skyline, I realized that I had reached a crossroads that would define the rest of my relationship with my family. Standing alone on the Ritz-Carlton's elegant terrace, watching the Chicago skyline twinkle in the distance, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. The emotional fog of confusion and self-doubt that had characterized my family relationships for 30 years was finally lifting, replaced by a cold understanding of exactly how I had been manipulated and exploited. More importantly, I was beginning to realize that I held far more power in this situation than my family understood. As I reflected on the events of the past 24 hours, I started mentally cataloging all the elements of this weekend that were under my direct control. I was the one who had made all the reservations, communicated with all the vendors, and established relationships with the hotel staff. My credit card was on file for every charge, my name was on every contract, and my business reputation had secured access to services and accommodations that would have been impossible for my family to obtain on their own. My contemplation was interrupted when Carlos Rodriguez, the hotel manager, approached me on the terrace. His expression was serious but kind as he asked how I was feeling after yesterday's incident, and whether there was anything the hotel could do to ensure my comfort and safety during the remainder of our stay. His genuine concern stood in stark contrast to my family's dismissive attitude toward my injury. What Carlos told me next was both validating and empowering. He explained that the hotel's security team had captured the entire assault incident on their surveillance cameras, and that they were prepared to provide video evidence if I chose to pursue legal action against my sister. He made it clear that the Ritz-Carlton took guest safety seriously, and that witnessing one guest violently assault another was something they could not ignore, regardless of family relationships. Carlos also mentioned that he and his staff had noticed the discrepancy between who was actually handling logistics and coordination versus who was taking credit for the weekend's success. As hospitality professionals, they were trained to observe family dynamics and guest interactions, and it was obvious to them that I was the actual organizer while someone else was claiming my work. He assured me that his staff understood the real situation and were prepared to support me in whatever way might be helpful. The conversation took an interesting turn when Carlos asked about the financial arrangements for our stay, mentioning that several additional charges had been added to our account that weren't part of the original booking. Apparently, Brooke had been signing for spa services, room service, and other amenities without any understanding that these charges were being added to my credit card. The hotel manager was concerned about potential payment issues and wanted to clarify authorization procedures for the remainder of our stay. This was when I realized the full extent of my power in the current situation. I was not just the person who had planned and coordinated everything. I was also the person who controlled every aspect of my family's access to the luxury experiences they were enjoying. Without my credit card, my reservations, and my industry relationships, they would have no way to maintain their current accommodations or activities. I asked Carlos about the specific mechanics of how the hotel's reservation and payment systems worked, particularly regarding my ability to modify or cancel services that had been booked under my name and credit card. His explanation confirmed what I had suspected. As the primary account holder and reservation contact, I had complete authority over all aspects of our stay, including the ability to revoke access to rooms, cancel services, and modify payment arrangements. During our conversation, Janet Mills, the photographer from yesterday's session, approached us on the terrace. She had been looking for me to discuss the final photo selections and delivery timeline, but she was also clearly concerned about my well-being after witnessing yesterday's assault. Janet mentioned that she had been photographing family events for 15 years and had never seen parents react to their child being injured the way mine had responded to Brooke's attack. Janet offered something that surprised me. She had captured the entire assault incident in her photographs, including my parents' laughing reaction to my injury. While she normally would delete such images to protect family privacy, she wanted me to know that she had documentation of what had occurred in case I ever needed evidence of the abuse I had suffered. She also offered to provide written testimony about what she had witnessed if legal action became necessary. The support and validation from both Carlos and Janet was overwhelming after years of having my reality constantly questioned and minimized by my family. These professional strangers had immediately recognized the seriousness of what they had witnessed and were offering concrete assistance, while my own parents had laughed at my pain and blamed me for causing problems. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more clarifying. As our conversation continued, I learned that the hotel had a legal team available to guests who needed assistance with incidents that occurred on the property. Carlos offered to connect me with their attorney if I wanted to understand my options regarding both the assault and any financial disputes that might arise from the weekend's expenses. He made it clear that the Ritz-Carlton's legal resources were available to help ensure guest safety and resolve conflicts. I spent the next hour having the most empowering conversation of my adult life with the hotel's attorney, Maria Gonzalez, who explained exactly what constituted assault under Illinois law, and what my rights were regarding both criminal charges and civil litigation. She also clarified my authority over the financial aspects of our hotel stay, and my legal obligations regarding payments for services that had been used by people other than myself. The final piece of my plan crystallized when grandmother Eleanor found me on the terrace later that evening. She had been looking for me to continue our earlier conversation, but she was also concerned about my long absence from the family group. When I explained what I had discovered about my legal and financial authority over the weekend's arrangements, her response surprised me completely. Eleanor told me that she was proud of me for finally standing up for myself, and that she had been waiting years for me to realize that I didn't have to accept abuse from people just because they were family. She revealed that she had already decided to change her will to exclude my parents and Brooke entirely, leaving her estate to me and several charities that reflected her values. Most importantly, she offered to support whatever decision I made about how to handle the current situation. As the evening concluded, I realized that I had unknowingly assembled a team of allies who understood the truth about my family's behavior and were prepared to support me in taking action. Carlos had security footage and hotel resources, Janet had photographic evidence and professional testimony, Maria had legal expertise and advocacy, and Eleanor had family authority and inheritance power. For the first time in my life, I was not standing alone against my family's manipulation and abuse. The plan that formed in my mind wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about establishing boundaries and consequences for behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. My family had taught me that actions have consequences, even though they had somehow exempted themselves from that rule. It was time for them to learn that exploiting and abusing someone eventually leads to losing access to that person's resources and goodwill. Sunday morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose and clarity that I hadn't felt in years. While my family slept in their luxury accommodations, enjoying amenities they had neither arranged nor paid for, I was already implementing the plan I had developed during my conversations with Carlos, Janet, and Maria the night before. The key was timing everything carefully to maximize the impact while minimizing the opportunities for my family to manipulate or guilt me out of following through. The first step was coordinating with Carlos to have all the room locks changed while my family was out enjoying their scheduled spa treatments. As the primary account holder, I had complete authority to control access to the accommodations, and Carlos assured me that the hotel's security team would handle the transition professionally and discreetly. I kept possession of all the new key cards, effectively taking control of my family's access to their rooms and belongings. While the lock changes were being implemented, I systematically called every vendor and service provider to cancel the remaining elements of our weekend celebration. I canceled the Sunday brunch reservation, the museum tour, the luxury transportation, and the farewell dinner that had been planned for that evening. In each case, I was clear that as the person who had booked and guaranteed payment for these services, I was exercising my right to cancel without penalty. The restaurant manager at the hotel's signature establishment was particularly understanding when I explained that family circumstances required canceling our farewell dinner reservation. Since I had worked with this hotel on previous events and had established professional relationships with their staff, they were accommodating about the short notice and offered to assist with any alternative arrangements I might need for myself personally. When my family returned from their spa treatments around noon, expecting to enjoy a leisurely lunch before our planned afternoon activities, they discovered their first taste of consequences. The restaurant where we had reservations for Sunday brunch informed them that the reservation had been canceled and that the account associated with our group was no longer authorized for charges. The confusion and frustration on their faces was evident as they struggled to understand what had happened. Brooke immediately tried to resolve the situation by explaining to the restaurant staff that there must be some mistake, that she was the one who had organized this entire weekend celebration. However, the staff politely but firmly explained that they could only make changes to reservations through the primary account holder, which was me. When she demanded to know where I was, they informed her that I was unavailable and suggested the family might want to make alternative dining arrangements. The situation escalated when my family attempted to return to their spa for additional treatments they had assumed were included in our weekend package. The spa staff explained that their access had been revoked and that any additional services would need to be paid for directly at the time of service. Since none of my family members had brought credit cards sufficient to cover luxury spa treatments at the Ritz-Carlton, they were politely but firmly turned away. When they tried to retreat to their rooms to regroup and contact me, they discovered that their key cards no longer worked. Hotel security was stationed discreetly nearby to ensure that the situation remained orderly, but it was clear that my family was beginning to panic as they realized the extent of their sudden powerlessness. Everything they had been enjoying and taking for granted was suddenly beyond their reach. I was waiting in the hotel lobby when my family finally tracked me down, their earlier confidence replaced by confusion and growing anger. My mother Linda immediately began demanding explanations for what she called the hotel's terrible service and management problems, while my father Robert tried to use his financial advisor authority to intimidate the front desk staff into resolving what he assumed were computer errors. Brooke's approach was characteristically aggressive and entitled. She stormed up to me and demanded that I fix whatever problems the hotel was having immediately, explaining that she had planned this entire weekend and wouldn't tolerate having it ruined by incompetent staff. Her assumption that I would immediately jump into problem-solving mode and restore her access to luxury amenities demonstrated how little she understood about the shift in power dynamics that had occurred. When I calmly explained that there were no hotel management problems or computer errors, that I had deliberately canceled their services and revoked their room access, the family's reaction was explosive. Linda began crying and wailing about how cruel I was being to grandmother Eleanor, while Robert started threatening legal action and financial consequences. Brooke's response was to attempt another physical assault, lunging at me with her hands extended toward my throat. However, this time hotel security was immediately present and intervened before Brooke could make contact. Carlos had positioned his team strategically around the lobby, and they moved swiftly to restrain Brooke and separate her from me. The incident was captured on multiple security cameras, and several hotel guests witnessed the attempted assault along with security's professional response. The presence of witnesses and security completely changed the dynamic of the confrontation. Instead of being able to gaslight me about what had happened or minimize Brooke's violence, my family was forced to deal with the reality that their behavior was being observed and documented by professionals who understood assault when they saw it. Carlos approached the group and made it clear that any further aggressive behavior would result in police involvement. I used this moment of forced calm to present my family with a clear ultimatum. I explained that I was prepared to restore their access to rooms and services under one specific condition. They needed to publicly acknowledge the years of abuse, exploitation, and manipulation they had subjected me to, apologize sincerely for their treatment of me, and commit to treating me with respect going forward. I made it clear that this wasn't about money or credit for planning the weekend, but about basic human dignity. Their response was immediate and predictably hostile. Robert accused me of being mentally unstable and trying to manipulate the family during grandmother Eleanor's special weekend. Linda claimed that I was making up stories about abuse, and that my success had made me arrogant and ungrateful for everything the family had done for me. Brooke simply screamed that I was crazy and demanded that I fix everything immediately or face consequences. None of them showed any willingness to acknowledge their behavior or take responsibility for the pain they had caused me over the years. Instead, they doubled down on their narrative that I was the problem, and that my response to their abuse was somehow more unreasonable than the abuse itself. Their complete inability to demonstrate accountability or empathy confirmed everything I had learned about their character during our conversation with the hotel staff. As my family continued to argue and make demands, Grandmother Eleanor appeared in the lobby. She had been waiting for me to update her on the situation, and she had witnessed enough of the confrontation to understand exactly what was happening. Her response surprised everyone, including me, when she walked directly to where I was standing and took my arm in a gesture of unmistakable support. Eleanor looked at her son and daughter-in-law with an expression of profound disappointment, and told them that she had been observing their treatment of me for years, and was disgusted by their behavior. She made it clear that she supported my decision to establish boundaries, and that she would not tolerate any further abuse of her granddaughter in her presence. Her words carried the weight of family authority that even my parents couldn't dismiss or argue with. The final blow came when Carlos approached the group to inform them that since their account was no longer authorized for hotel charges, and they had no alternative payment method available, they would need to vacate the property immediately. Hotel security would escort them to collect their belongings under supervision, but they could not remain in a luxury establishment they had no means of paying for. The sight of my family being escorted out of the Ritz-Carlton by security guards while other guests watched was the natural consequence of years of manipulation and abuse finally reaching its logical conclusion. They had taught me that actions have consequences, and now they were experiencing those consequences themselves. The irony was that the money they had assumed they could exploit from me was no longer available to rescue them from the situation their own behavior had created. The scene that unfolded in the Ritz-Carlton lobby as my family realized they were being evicted from the hotel was both satisfying and sobering to witness. The same people who had spent years telling me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, and too focused on myself were now having complete emotional meltdowns in front of strangers, because their actions had finally resulted in consequences they couldn't manipulate away. Brooke's response to being told she had to leave the hotel was to have what could only be described as an adult temper tantrum. She began screaming at the hotel staff, demanding to speak to managers and owners, threatening lawsuits and bad reviews, and generally behaving in a way that confirmed every assessment hotel security had made about her character. Her complete lack of self-control or awareness about how her behavior appeared to others was both embarrassing and revealing. When hotel security began escorting the family to their rooms to collect belongings under supervision, Brooke attempted to refuse to leave and declared that she would not be forced out of accommodations she had supposedly arranged herself. However, when the security team calmly explained that she had no legal right to remain in rooms she couldn't pay for, and that continued resistance would result in police involvement, even she had to acknowledge the reality of her powerless position. My parents' approach was to cycle through every manipulation tactic they had used on me over the years, apparently hoping that one of them would work on hotel management the way they had worked on me. Linda tried tears and emotional appeals about family emergencies and special circumstances, while Robert attempted to use professional authority and implied legal threats to intimidate staff into making exceptions to hotel policy. However, hotel staff were trained to handle difficult guests and weren't emotionally invested in family dynamics the way I had been for 30 years. Carlos and his team remained professional but firm, explaining that hotel policies applied equally to all guests, and that no exceptions could be made for people who couldn't provide valid payment for services. The manipulation tactics that had been so effective on me for decades were completely ineffective against professional boundaries and business policies. The most pathetic moment came when my family attempted to use grandmother Eleanor as leverage to change my mind about restoring their access to rooms and services. Linda approached Eleanor with tears streaming down her face, begging her to convince me to be reasonable, and explaining that they were all just trying to create a special celebration for her 80th birthday. However, grandmother Eleanor's response was nothing like what they expected. She told them clearly that she was disgusted by their treatment of me, and that she had no interest in being part of manipulating me into accepting abuse. She explained that watching them exploit and humiliate me had ruined any enjoyment she might have gotten from the weekend celebration, and that their behavior toward me was far more upsetting than any inconvenience caused by losing hotel accommodations. Eleanor's public support for my position was devastating to my parents' attempts to position themselves as victims in the situation. They couldn't argue with grandmother's assessment without disrespecting the family member they were supposedly trying to honor, but they also couldn't accept responsibility for their behavior without admitting that everything I had said about their abuse was true. The financial reality of their situation began to sink in as my family realized they had no way to pay for alternative accommodations in downtown Chicago. Robert's attempts to use his credit cards for emergency hotel bookings were declined due to insufficient credit limits, and none of them had brought enough cash to cover even basic motel rooms for the night. They had become so accustomed to exploiting my resources that they had no backup plan for supporting themselves independently. When Linda desperately called extended family members trying to arrange emergency financial assistance, she discovered another consequence of their weekend behavior. Several relatives who had been at the birthday dinner were confused about why Linda was asking for money when Brooke had supposedly planned and paid for such an elaborate celebration. The story about their current crisis required admitting that I had actually been responsible for everything they had been crediting to Brooke. The legal consequences began to unfold when Carlos informed me that the hotel's legal team was prepared to pursue assault charges against Brooke for both the original incident on Friday and her attempted attack in the lobby on Sunday. With multiple witnesses, security footage, and photographic evidence from Janet's documentation, they had a strong case that would likely result in criminal charges and potential civil liability. Maria Gonzalez, the hotel's attorney, explained that Brooke's pattern of violence combined with my family's enabling response created a clear case for harassment and assault charges that could result in significant legal consequences. She offered to connect me with resources for pursuing protective orders and civil litigation if I wanted to ensure that this pattern of abuse would finally face meaningful legal consequences. The photographer, Janet Mills, approached me as my family was being escorted from the hotel to reiterate her offer to provide evidence of what she had witnessed and photographed during the weekend. She mentioned that in her 15 years of photographing family events, she had never seen such clear examples of abuse and manipulation, and she wanted to ensure that I had support in pursuing any legal action I chose to take. As hotel security completed the process of removing my family from the property, I stood in the lobby watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as they gathered on the sidewalk with their luggage, arguing among themselves about whose fault their situation was and how they were going to resolve their immediate crisis. The sight of them stranded outside the luxury hotel they had assumed they could access through my work and money was the perfect metaphor for their actual relationship to the success they had tried to claim. The most revealing part of watching them through the glass was seeing how quickly they turned on each other when their manipulation tactics stopped working. Instead of taking responsibility for their treatment of me or acknowledging that their own behavior had created their current crisis, they immediately began blaming each other for various aspects of what had gone wrong. The family unity they had claimed was so important dissolved instantly when they faced real consequences. Grandmother Eleanor chose to remain at the hotel with me rather than leave with the rest of the family, making a clear statement about whose side she was on in this conflict. Her decision to publicly separate herself from their behavior and support my position was perhaps the most validating moment of the entire weekend. Having the family member I respected most acknowledge that I was right to establish boundaries gave me confidence that I was making the right choices. As evening fell and my family continued their heated discussion on the sidewalk outside, I realized that this moment represented more than just consequences for a single weekend of abuse. It was the culmination of 30 years of exploitation and manipulation, finally meeting someone who had both the resources and the determination to establish boundaries. They had trained me to believe I had no power in our family relationships, but they had been wrong about that for years. The justice wasn't just in watching them face immediate consequences for their behavior, but in understanding that I had finally learned to value myself enough to refuse to accept abuse. The money I had spent on this weekend celebration had purchased something far more valuable than hotel rooms and gourmet meals. It had bought me the clarity to see my family's true character, and the strength to respond appropriately to their treatment of me. 6 months have passed since that weekend at the Ritz-Carlton, and the transformation in my life has been nothing short of remarkable. Walking away from my family's toxicity was the most difficult and most liberating decision I have ever made, and every day since has reinforced that I made the right choice for my mental health, my self-respect, and my future happiness. The immediate aftermath of that weekend was challenging as my family attempted every manipulation tactic they could think of to restore their access to my resources and force me back into my role as the family scapegoat. They sent guilt-inducing text messages about breaking up the family and hurting grandmother Eleanor, made promises about changing their behavior that I knew from experience were meaningless, and even attempted to turn extended relatives against me by spreading false stories about my mental state and motivations. However, having finally seen their true character clearly, and having the support of witnesses who had observed their behavior, I was immune to their manipulation attempts in a way I had never been before. Instead of feeling guilty or questioning my decisions, I felt a sense of peace and clarity that grew stronger with each passing day. The constant anxiety and self-doubt that had characterized my family relationships for 30 years simply disappeared once I stopped trying to earn love and respect from people who were incapable of providing either. The legal consequences for Brooke's violent behavior provided additional validation for my decision to establish boundaries. The hotel's security footage and witness testimony resulted in assault charges that led to her conviction, and a requirement to attend anger management classes. The court's recognition that what I had experienced was indeed criminal assault helped me understand that my family's minimization of her violence had been gaslighting designed to protect the abuser rather than support the victim. My relationship with grandmother Eleanor has flourished in ways I never expected once we were free from the toxic dynamics created by my parents and sister. She has become not just a beloved family member, but a genuine mentor and friend who offers wisdom about building healthy relationships and maintaining personal boundaries. Her decision to change her will wasn't about punishment, but about ensuring her resources would go to someone who shared her values of integrity and personal responsibility. The most unexpected benefit of cutting contact with my toxic family members has been the explosive growth of my event planning business. Freed from the constant emotional drain of managing their manipulation and abuse, I have had energy and creativity to invest in professional development and client relationships that has resulted in bookings and referrals beyond anything I had previously achieved. Several clients who witnessed or heard about the hotel incident have specifically mentioned their respect for my ability to maintain professional standards under personal pressure. Dr. Patricia Williams, the therapist I began seeing shortly after the hotel weekend, has helped me understand the psychological patterns that had kept me trapped in abusive family relationships for so many years. Working through the childhood conditioning that taught me to accept mistreatment in exchange for conditional love has been challenging, but transformative work that has affected every aspect of my life in positive ways. Perhaps most importantly, I have learned to trust my instincts about people and relationships in ways that have allowed me to build genuine friendships, and even explore romantic relationships with people who treat me with consistent kindness and respect. For 30 years, I had been taught that love required accepting abuse, but I have discovered that healthy relationships actually involve mutual respect, support, and appreciation that doesn't need to be earned through suffering. The contrast between my old family relationships and my new healthy relationships is stark and illuminating. Where my family demanded that I constantly prove my worth through service and sacrifice, my new relationships involve people who value my company and contributions without requiring me to earn basic respect. Where my family punished me for setting boundaries, my new relationships thrive because everyone involved feels safe to express needs and maintain personal limits. My professional success has also attracted the attention of other families dealing with similar dynamics, and I have been able to use my experience to help people recognize manipulation tactics and establish healthy boundaries. There is something deeply satisfying about helping other scapegoats understand that they deserve better treatment and have the power to change their circumstances, even when it seems impossible. The financial freedom that comes from not being constantly exploited by family members has allowed me to invest in my business, my education, and my personal growth in ways that were never possible when my resources were being drained by people who took everything and gave nothing in return. The money I used to spend trying to buy love and acceptance from my family is now invested in relationships and experiences that actually provide genuine fulfillment. Looking back on that weekend at the Ritz-Carlton, I can see that it was never really about Grandmother Eleanor's birthday celebration or family unity. It was about my family's final attempt to exploit my resources while publicly humiliating me, and my unexpected refusal to accept that treatment. The plan they had designed to showcase my worthlessness instead became the moment when I finally understood my own value. The most profound lesson I learned was that being related to someone by blood or marriage doesn't give them the right to abuse, exploit, or diminish you. Family relationships should enhance your life and support your growth, not drain your resources and destroy your self-esteem. When family members consistently choose to harm rather than help, the healthiest response is often to limit or eliminate their access to your time, energy, and resources. I have also learned that healing from family trauma doesn't happen overnight, but it is absolutely possible with the right support and commitment to personal growth. Every day brings new evidence that I made the right choice in prioritizing my well-being over my family's comfort with their dysfunctional patterns. The peace and happiness I feel now is something I never thought was possible when I was trapped in those toxic relationships. Standing in my beautiful new office today, surrounded by evidence of professional success and healthy relationships that I built independently, I feel grateful for the strength I found to walk away from people who couldn't love me properly. Sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is refusing to enable others' destructive behavior, even when those people are family members who claim to care about you. The woman who stood outside that hotel 6 months ago watching her family argue and blame each other has grown into someone who knows her worth and refuses to accept anything less than the respect and kindness she deserves. That transformation wasn't easy, but it was necessary, and it has created space for relationships and experiences that actually add value to my life rather than constantly depleting it. I learned that being family doesn't give anyone the right to diminish your worth. And sometimes walking away is the only path to peace. The love I was seeking from my family was never going to be available because they were too invested in their toxic patterns to change. But the love and respect I needed was always available from healthier people once I learned to recognize and accept it. What questions has my story raised for you about family dynamics and personal boundaries? Have you ever had to make difficult choices about toxic relationships in your own life? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others who might need to hear this message find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming difficult family situations and building healthier relationships. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of establishing boundaries and choosing self-respect over family dysfunction. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember that you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect, especially by the people who claim to love you. Here's to building the relationships and life you actually deserve, surrounded by people who celebrate your success rather than trying to diminish it.